right, good evening and welcome into the NFL preseason edition of Live Before Lock. We got everything you possibly need. A little bit different than last night in that we've added a game here. So, yes, it's not the 10-game slate that we have tomorrow, 3 games tonight, but you know what? We're getting you ready. We're getting you conditioned to how to approach the preseason as opposed to the NFL regular season, which is a completely different beast and animal, as you know. It's not going to be me. It's going to be Matt Gajewski tonight. And definitely don't pay attention to much that I have to say outside of maybe some reaction from Philadelphia. But Matt is in the house, the two of us with you. The chat as well is up and running. So any questions you have, just like we do normally before lock, make sure you get them in the chat. Super chat is up and running, not necessary, but definitely the best way you can get our attention. Jordan's in the house producing, so make sure you say hello to Jordan on the chat as well. And the show brought to you by Prize Picks Betting You. We'll get to that in a couple of seconds. But Matt, my man, first time you and I have broken bread here on the channel, so it's a pleasure to finally catch up with you. All of the work you've been doing for us since day one, getting ready for the NFL season.
Thank you for the kind words. Appreciate it, man. I love the preseason. I love things like college football and the MAC and these weird conferences. So this is my time to shine, seeing these guys go off to the NFL, because we won't be able to talk about most of them after the next couple weeks.
It's a great point, right? Especially as the preseason gets shortened and possibly even more into the future. You mentioned the MAC. You and Rasa all over everything on Betting You. Every Wednesday comes out the college football preview edition of everything you need to know ahead of time, from the MAC, the MAAC, all the way up to the SEC. Whatever conference is covered each and every Wednesday, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. That's Matt and Ben, of course, on Betting You. So, yes, I'm sure that this is probably the equivalent of like Sunbelt action, where you're looking at, right, 2 months before kickoff. You're trying to get into ahead of everything possible. But to your point, those kids are going to be playing in October and September, November. A lot of guys. And look, this is week 1. So with the shortened preseason and kind of what we've seen, forget the Hall of Fame game. That was a piece of shit. We're going to move on from that. But from last night to kind of heading into tonight, what I'm really curious to kind of begin with, Matt, is just, you mentioned you're a junkie for the preseason. You love it. How does your mind work? What are some big differences as far as like your strategy, your approach, even and especially early on in the preseason, as opposed to when we get deep and, you know, kind of regular season mode?
We're always looking at playing time, but in week 1, I'm primarily looking at these second string players. Yesterday ran a little hot, but, you know, like going into the second half, Ramondre Stevenson, I believe, had 0 points. And we definitely ran hot with that 91-yard handoff towards the end of the game. Won't deny that whatsoever. But I mean, in week 1 preseason, that's how you should feel going into the second half of some of these games. A lot of your guys maybe haven't played at all yet, and that's fine. We're looking just for the spots where we can find the most playing time. So in our lineups, you might not necessarily stack. I know that's something we're doing basically every time we're playing in the regular season DFS. You're not necessarily looking for just one back on a roster. There are times you might want to play 2. Last night, that was profitable in some spots. Najee didn't get as much run as we wanted, but if you played Jalen Samuels, you were fine there. And with Jalen Samuels scoring the touchdown, it was completely fine if you played him with Najee Harris. So 3-game slate tonight. I think there might be some more situations where you end up with 2 backs on your rosters from the same team, and that's okay. And that's just preseason. Some of those weird things are going to happen.
So you mentioned the stack, right? And that's where I feel like you can get into so much trouble, right? Unless you knew ahead of time that Joe Flacco or Quez Watkins was going to be a major stack that you could benefit from. But the reality is and this is where I think it gets so tricky, is a backup comes in, especially in week 1, where you expect to play a significantly amount more than the starting quarterback. But you don't know how much that overlaps, how much that quarterback could be throwing to 3s, or if his time is done with the 2. So I don't even know where you would begin outside of maybe just if you're playing a bunch of lineups, right, in bigger tournaments, to just kind of cut a couple of lineups there and say, you know what, it's worth taking 1 quarterback and maybe 3 guys. 2 could be second string, 1 could be third string. Because again, I don't even know how you would just narrow down the conversation or parameters of a stack, not knowing the true playing time as opposed to just depth charts.
For sure. And some of these teams, you're going to have 12, 13 healthy receivers. For example, yeah, I mean, Dallas and Arizona both project to play with 12 receivers tonight. And for Dallas, I mean, you have three quarterbacks that are going to go out there. So if you're trying to like stack, I don't know why you would do this, but if you're trying to stack DiNucci with somebody, there's a potential that he throws to like six of these guys. The chances that you predict the touchdown score is pretty low. In a 3-game slate, you're likely going to end up with some stacks naturally if you're running a lot of lineups, but it's not something I'm trying to force.
Is there a mistake or two that you kind of see people make in the preseason that may work in the regular season, or is just a major no that you notice is happening a lot more in the preseason as opposed to regular season?
One thing I think people do a little too much of is try to like get in the coach's mind and figure out who is going to be playing a lot. So for example, tonight, we're not going to see James Conner with Arizona. Chase Edmonds probably not going to play a lot either. I think there's still 4 healthy running backs in Arizona that will see work. People might try to construct a narrative about a certain back, like this guy's trying to make the roster, we should be playing him. When in reality, there's still other backfields that maybe aren't as attractive by a player name basis, but they have fewer backs overall. So I'm still trying to target those narrow backfields rather than create these narratives of who is going to see more playing time.
So you mentioned, and again, we have it from quarterbacks. We're going to bounce around a typical live before lock show, and the chat already up and buzzing here. See more people popping in. So you know what to do. Hit that like button right away as soon as you come in. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel as well. That does wonders for us, and the notification bell, so you're not popping in 8.5 minutes late on a live before lock show. But as we get into these 3 games, we'll start to look at the quarterback and move around to different positions. One thing I am curious about is let's look at inactives, right? Let's look at how you've approached tonight from guys who are hurt to guys who we know just they ain't playing. I mean, from the Dak Prescott, the MRI, the shoulder injury, to whoever may be out there that is technically, if you will, hurt to the point where they're not getting first team reps, and it's just a pass on that. So I think that's probably a good thing to look at from your perspective, Matt, is just how we look at these 3 games, 6 teams, and the major inactives that we know to kind of work around.
Yeah, we want to look for teams that have the fewest players on the field. So right now, Arizona projects to have 3 quarterbacks on the field because Kyler Murray is going to play. Cliff Kingsbury said about a series or 2 that is going to take away some time from the backups. Buffalo, you have 4 quarterbacks. Josh Allen's not playing, so you have 3 there. Detroit, they're having 3 guys go. Jared Goff's going to play a little bit. Buffalo is similar. Josh Allen's not going to play. They're going to have 3 quarterbacks. Atlanta and Tennessee are the places where we really see these inactives come into play. Matt Ryan hasn't technically been ruled out, but he also hasn't played in the preseason in recent years. I know it's a new coaching staff coming in, so maybe he goes out there for a drive. He's one to watch. If he's not in pads, I think we can look to some of the backups. And then in Tennessee, we already had Ryan Tannehill ruled out. Not an injury. He's just not going to play.
Is there a position where it doesn't matter to you? And look, I think this is a perfect example heading into week 1, because we know already just by design, the ones are so limited. But is it ever worth it, in your opinion, to run with a 1 even if it's at a 1 position? And look, everything's fluid, right? So nothing is locked in, static in that sense. But is there any position maybe that jumps out more so than not that maybe lends itself to you thinking, yeah, this guy's probably going to be out there for 2 series, maybe 3 series, but you know what? Based on expected ROI of productivity, he could, not is, but could be worth it.
That's usually going to happen when you see the ones out there. And these are usually young players that will stick on the field. For example, Deontay Johnson last night for Pittsburgh, he played a few series and he caught a lot of passes because he's going against mainly backups. We saw that with Chase Claypool in the Hall of Fame game. Najee Harris has been out there a decent amount for Pittsburgh. He didn't actually put up anything in the box score, but those are situations where I'll target. And we do have a few rookies tonight that are projected to play not only with the 1s, but maybe a little bit with the 2s just because they're new to the offense.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the best thing, because you wouldn't do that with a quarterback. Clearly, we're not. You mentioned as far as Arizona, Dallas, multiple guys, 12 guys, right, expected at the wide receiver position for both teams. I mean, my goodness, already closing your eyes trying to find a needle in a haystack. Why add more hay to the stack at that point, right?
Yeah, those teams are tough. And I think there are guys that kind of fit the mold, particularly for Arizona. There's one particular rookie I think that they might put out there for a little bit extra time. But otherwise, like you said, there's just so many healthy receivers. And on Arizona, it's based like, I don't think DeAndre Hopkins, AJ Green, and Christian Kirk will play much. But even if they take a series away, that's still a lot of bodies. And even if you exclude them, Andy Isabella is not going to play. You still have 9 receivers on Arizona that are going to be battling for those second team reps. That's still a lot of players, and there's other teams that have more narrow distributions.
You know, the chat's already buzzing, Matt. You know, you can't hit them up with nugget after nugget with Lawfee on the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel live before lock last. They're already asking you for Arizona wide receivers. We haven't even started with the quarterbacks or anything else. Wide receiver, I see this, and this is the type of stuff that drives Jordan mad when we bounce around and go off of schedule here. But we're seeing multiple people asking you for your top Arizona wide receivers at the very least.
I think it's still probably Rondale Moore. He's going to be playing early with the 1s. I think there's a chance he's on the field a little bit with the 2s. And I think they probably try to get him going with some gadget plays. He was used entirely as a gadget receiver at Purdue. They had terrible offensive line, bad quarterback play, so you never really saw him used downfield. He's a gadget player that could get you some really easy catches and yard after catch opportunities, which is super important in the preseason. We saw that with Quez Watkins last night. And he doesn't even have to score the 79-yard touchdown. If he gets 2 or 3 catches for 30 yards, that's really consistent preseason play.
I think you made a fan and a half with Stay Odd, yelling Rondale Moore until you said it. I was like, thank you. Thank you. Look, just be patient out there. Odd. Right? That's all I'm saying is be patient. Matt's got you. All right. I know you want to yell like, I got it in class, but the teacher will call on you. We promise with that. All right. Let's start to look around, especially.
One thing on Moore too.
Please.
Josh in the chat said, I thought Rondale Moore was out. He did battle an injury in practice earlier in the week. It's not expected to be serious, but preseason, you got to watch these guys. If he's not warming up, that's huge. So if you put Rondale Moore in, just make sure you watch the pregame and see that he's active.
Good stuff. Yes. And I think that's going to work as we kind of move around here actually, you know what? Before we actually look at position by position, I'm throwing you a little bit on the spot. So if you need me to filibuster another minute or so while you grab it, but are there other names? Because we are locked before tonight, right? And it's not like a strategy show where you have some more time to look at things, but is there another Rondale Moore scenario that you're looking at tonight that you laid out where we should be paying attention right up until kick to see about somebody that you like, but we're still monitoring his situation?
There is. Detroit is one in particular with Jamar Jefferson. So he's their 7th round rookie out of Oregon State, really productive player there. Caught a lot of balls too, so he has a 3-down skill set. He battled an injury earlier this week. He did return to practice, but similar to Rondale Moore, maybe they just hold him out for precautionary reasons, and we won't have that information. Luckily, Detroit is an early kick, so you'll get this, and you can use that information with your roster.
All right, so let's bounce around now to position by position. Again, the chat, super chat, best way to get us as far as anything you may have, but we'll do our best to answer everything you have out there. A reminder, though, as we have so many things happening here on the channel, and the EPL is back. So we have some soccer DFS projections up for you. I know a lot of people were waiting for that to return. Well, we need the EPL to come back first, and now all of our DFS projections are up there for soccer. So if you want to try this thing out and think to yourself, well, you know, I'm really here for Matt and all the fantasy football stuff, maybe not football. Well, we got you covered here. So go to Awesemo Plus. Soccer is free with our promo code FREESOCCER. So that's it. Your first week of Awesemo Plus Soccer is free. Use our promo code FREESOCCER. Click on the link in this description right here in this video to activate that, and you'll be taken off. All right, so let's look at a couple of quarterback spots here, especially because, again, this is the one that we always are paying the most attention to in the regular season. Unfortunately, here, we know that you're not going to get squat really much out of the ones. And look, as I told you before the show, I'm dealing with a quarterback controversy in Philadelphia because Joe Flacco threw a screen pass. So who the hell knows tonight as far as once the ones are out. But is there... Let's look at the top quarterback that you have projected kind of in the backdrop of where we have to kind of look at. And I'm curious if it's not how you approach a guy like Trubisky, because we've seen this with Flacco, even to a lesser extent, Dwayne Haskins, where if you're coming from some sense of pedigree and you're playing with the 2s or maybe even the 3s, life is a lot easier than week 7 in the regular season where you're trying to keep up with the best of the best.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think you can get into some trouble playing this game, though. Again, we just want to target playing time more than anything. So
Yes.
even if a guy like Trubisky is out there and we know he's, former starter with Chicago, if he's only going to be seeing a quarter, that's not something we want either. So it's always a balance. It's always taking a nuanced approach. It's a short slate, so I don't think Trubisky is a bad play by any means. In GPPs, he's certainly live. But if it's these larger slates, you're going to have to take all of the context together to make those decisions.
So where do we begin? Is it more a matter of trying to identify? Because I imagine that the quarterback position, especially in the first now 2 weeks, not 3 weeks, you're trying to manage. You're trying to manage how much of a second string quarterback is going to play deeper into a game because he's throwing the better talent than the third string. So how do we balance that tonight with some of your favorite quarterbacks outside of what we talked about with Trubisky?
Yeah, that's super important. And again, teams are going to run more in the second half too, which is also it's going to influence the quarterback position. But one in particular where I think we're going to see this is Tennessee, where we don't have Tannehill. There's only two quarterbacks playing. One, Logan Woodside, is going to be out there first playing with the first team. And both of these guys are expected to see about a half. So for Woodside, he's been the backup for Tennessee for a few years now. He's basically fended off all comers. And I think he'll do the same tonight. Matt Barkley's the quarterback that likely plays in the second half there. Again, he's going to get a full half. So that's really good for GPPs. I would prefer Woodside in cash formats just because you're going to get him with the better players on the field. Neither of them are really dual threats. But again, if you look back to Woodside's previous performance in the preseason, he threw for 539 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions in 2019. So he has good outings already under his belt.
Is there a situation that we should kind of avoid? And again, maybe it is, as you mentioned, that game in Detroit where we're going to have very little of Goff, right, and nothing from Josh Allen. So is there a situation, a quarterback that you think maybe even be popular that we should fade, or maybe even worse than that, just stay completely away from? And it's probably going to be, I imagine, somebody in that second string unit where the playing time just won't match the ownership.
Yeah, I think you're fading Buffalo and Detroit almost entirely. Outside of the big tournaments, I think you could play a guy like Trubisky in some of the larger field stuff. Same with maybe DiNucci because he has a rushing floor in the larger field stuff. But it's basically a 2 quarterback race right now, I think, for cash. It's going to be Woodside and it's going to be Felipe Franks. The thing with Felipe Franks is we need to make sure Matt Ryan isn't active. If Ryan plays even a couple series, it will influence Franks. If Matt Ryan is out, I think Franks shoots up to the best quarterback play on this slate. He's a rookie, split time at Tennessee and Florida, but Franks gets a little bit of an edge here because he has dual threat ability. He's a bigger bodied quarterback, so he's not going to be like Lamar Jackson out there, but he will pick up rushing yards, and that rushing floor is super important. After we find quarterbacks that have secure playing time, finding someone with a rushing floor gives you a solid floor, particularly in low-risk contests and cash games.
How much does it change, just to kind of follow up on that, how much does it change if Ryan is starting? Let's assume Matt Ryan starts, then I think it's a safe assumption to assume he's out there for 2 series. No more than that. I would imagine he's out there for 2 series, maybe 1 if you're lucky, but then it's kind of like, what the hell's the point in the first place? It doesn't sound like, Matt, it would be enough of a deterrent for you not to draft him, clearly, but do you have any hesitation? Is there a name that maybe moves, even if it's not ahead of Franks? Is there somebody that is now becoming neck and neck with where you may go if, in fact, Ryan is starting?
I would still have Franks too. In cash, I would pivot to Woodside. But again, like you said, I don't think Matt Ryan plays more than a series or 2, but it does take away some of the playing time for Franks. And their third stringer is AJ McCarron. It's not like Franks is going to go out there and see like a full half of evaluation. I think those guys split time pretty evenly because they do not have a solidified backup. That's a surefire battle that's going to happen. So whatever happens in this game, I think it's probably an even split between Franks and McCarron. So we really want Matt Ryan out for each of them to secure around a half.
Are we sure that Gilbert is not going to get more like there's not going to be an extension of Dallas's playing time tonight? And look, it's not the Eagles fan in me. It's the football fan in me that it is just wretched with the idea of having to roster Ben DiNucci in anything.
The chat, sorry, not to
no, go ahead. The chat's
topic.
More important than me.
Well, they just have the update that Matt Ryan's not dressed. So Franks becomes the best quarterback play on the slate. But as far as Dallas, I actually looked this up. I look back to see what they've done in some previous preseasons. I know they had a new coaching staff come in, but they've pretty much leaned on their backups, except for that third preseason game, the dress rehearsal, if you will. So I think we probably see a similar rotation among the quarterbacks tonight.
With Dallas.
Yep, with Dallas.
Okay. So unfortunately, that does mean more Ben DiNucci than I think we're willing to see on our television. Is that fair?
I'm fine with DiNucci in DFS for GPPs because he runs. He's horrific when he tries to drop back and throw, but whew.
Well, you know what? That's a good point here, right? Because he's going to be in. He's not going to have starters in front of him. So, granted, things are going to equalize as far as going up against Arizona's defense. They're not going to have ones deep in that game either. But that's a pretty good. I think that it's something that's probably underlooked and under discussed here, which is you should be looking at how a quarterback's going to be reacting to who's around him. So a second, probably more third string line for DiNucci would, especially because he'd much rather run than get hit holding the football. So I think you're right now. That actually, okay, I stand corrected. My DiNucci slander stands corrected. I'm willing to at least insert him into a couple of lineups here, Matt. You convinced me in 45 seconds.
Yeah, just a flyer on DiNucci. I mean, you're not playing him. He's significantly worse than the quarterbacks we already mentioned. I think he's worse than the backups. I mean, I would rather play Barkley. I'd rather play McCarron. They're pretty good GPP plays because everybody is going to be concentrated on Woodside and Franks. So if you want direct pivots, Barkley and McCarron are going to see the same amount of playing time as Woodside and Franks. They're just going to be the second quarterback into the game. And one last guy I'll mention before we change topics here is Chris Streveler. So he is the the second stringer for Arizona. Now, Kyler Murray is going to play a little bit in this game, and they have Colt McCoy and Streveler coming into the game afterwards. But we like Streveler because he's a great dual threat. If we go back to his college career at South Dakota, he rushed for 720 yards and 11 scores. So I think he's a better play than DiNucci because he has more rushing upside, and he should have slightly more consistent playing time tonight.
Do you look at, last kind of a generalized question here, how much are you looking at who else is around the quarterback on the depth chart when you're trying to identify a third, even fourth string guy, especially in the first preseason game where you know there's going to be a lot more opportunity? Does that even factor in as far as who the third or fourth string wideouts would be according to who this quarterback may be?
Not a ton. It mostly comes down to playing time.
Okay. And that's pretty much across the board, right? We're trying to leverage ownership against playing time for the most part.
Yep.
Okay. Makes sense. It's almost like you could apply that across the board in DFS sports, right? Like, hey, take who you have highly projected, leverage that against ownership. So let's move around, right? From quarterbacks. And again, I see people bouncing in here on the chat. We're going to get into running backs here and wideouts, start to work in any possible stack as well. So from quarterback to kind of the same scenario conversation we just had with the QBs to running backs, we're trying to identify guys who have the most shot at playing time. And to your point about Arizona and Dallas's wideouts, the fewest amount of backs that we can expect on the field. So where do you begin the most confident with any running back on this 3-game slate tonight?
The shortest backfield is Buffalo. And it's not really that close. They have Zach Moss injured, battling a hamstring. Christian Wade is injured. And then you have Reggie Gilliam, who's a fullback. You have Tywan Jones, who's a special teamer. I believe he only played 3 offensive snaps last year. Every other snap he played was on special teams. That leaves three guys. Devin Singletary, we know he's not going to be out there for very long. Matt Breida and Antonio Williams. There were reports coming out today that Matt Breida has clearly worked ahead of Antonio Williams. That means he's a pretty good shot to make this roster. It might come down to special teams ability between Jones and Breida, but Antonio Williams is on the outside looking in to make the roster. That's great for DFS because we have 3 backs that are going to handle any sort of work, and it looks like it's primarily just going to be 2 in Breida and Williams. Williams might get the second half all to himself.
So I saw on the chat a question about that, Breida, Mills, or Evans. And I wonder if you start to factor in where you look at Breida, how high he is in comparison to a couple of other names.
I think
and that came from Thugga Thuggin, by the way.
Love that name. But I think Breida's a pretty good play too. I think his workload is probably, or his playing time, I guess I should say, is a little less secure than Williams because I think he is ahead of Williams definitively. But ultimately, Breida and Williams are both great plays, in my opinion. We're trying to get the narrow backfields. If you play Breida, I'm completely fine with it. I have a slight preference towards Williams. And if you guys don't know who Williams is, he's a former North Carolina running back. In 2018, he was the starter there. He was on the same team as Javonte Williams and Michael Carter. So he ended up getting beaten out. I don't think that's any slight to Williams himself. Those are two very good running backs, has good pass catching ability too. So he's someone that could play on all three downs.
So let's kind of bounce around here, different games and different squads outside of what you laid out there with Breida and Buffalo being the most, or I guess the shortest backfield. Where else can we start to pivot to where we can expect either if it's like a one and Mike Davis, who's probably not going to be out there much, right? Or if it's just trying to move away from a guy who's not going to be out there at all as far as a one and take advantage maybe of a two, taking more reps.
There's some situations I think that we have condensed backfields. They're a little less secure, I think, than the Buffalo backfield. But one to point out is Atlanta. And with Atlanta, I think it's mainly going to come down to Javian Hawkins and Caleb Huntley. Like you mentioned, we're not going to see Mike Davis, at least for long. Cordarrelle Patterson, probably not either. His role is very secure. He's a veteran. They don't really need to put him out there. And then behind all these guys, Keith Smith is a fullback. They recently moved John Rain to H-back. He's a former tight end from Northwestern. I think he doesn't really see any carries. Probably just going to use him as a blocker. And then they signed Deontay Foreman this week. He's not going to see carries either. That leaves the two UDFAs, Javian Hawkins and Caleb Huntley. Between the two, I have a slight preference towards Hawkins because he caught a lot of passes at Louisville. He's a little scat back. Caleb Huntley is more of a big bruising back, didn't really catch passes at Ball State. But, you know, there's a little dichotomy there. Maybe they use Caleb Huntley to grind out the clock at the end of the game, and they use Hawkins maybe with Franks as a pass catcher early in the game when they're trying to evaluate these backups. That's another strong situation. I have a slight preference to Huntley. Detroit is a situation to watch because of the Jamar Jefferson injury. If Jamar Jefferson ends up sitting out, you're joining DeAndre Swift on the bench. Jamal Williams isn't going to play much. Then they have just Dedrick Mills, who is an undrafted free agent from Nebraska. The other running backs they have on their team are Godwin Igwebuike, who is playing running back for the first time since high school. He was a defensive player in college. Javon Leake was signed this week to replace Michael Warren, who was waived with an injury. Dedrick Mills might see all of the work if Jamar Jefferson is out. He would immediately become a must-play in cash formats for me. He's someone to watch, certainly. And the last one I'll mention is, I know we're talking about a lot of teams here, is Arizona.
Yeah.
This one comes down to James Conner getting put on the COVID list this week. Arizona does have 5 running backs on the roster still, which is why they're a little lower for me. Chase Edmonds won't play much. Eno Benjamin's probably a lock to make the roster, leaving Jonathan Ward, Tavian Feaster, and Ito Smith. This is just a GPP consideration for me, but it did get thinner yesterday with James Conner on COVID.
Oh, I love that because you breaking down like 6 or 7 different elements in the backfield coincides with like 4 different chats we got about how Matt is a cyborg. Gajeski needs a freaking raise. This man's college knowledge that carries over into preseason. I saw earlier in the chat, somebody thinks you eat those limitless pills before the show because you just come out and spit fire about all this preseason stuff that nobody would know unless you're studying the game like you. So no, you don't have to apologize about going on and all that stuff. It's just right on brand with you, bro.
I appreciate the kind words, everyone in the chat. It means a lot. I got a weird lifestyle over here, grinding these preseason slates, looking at college football in the MAC, you know, getting the edge on players like Jonathan Ward.
Look, it's got to be exponentially helpful for you. And look, if there's ever a quick plug about betting you and about making sure you understand what's happening in college football this year, so that by next year you can sit along with these live before lock and NFL preseason strategy shows that Matt is a part of and just be like, oh yeah, I know what he's going to say next. He's going to be like our buddy Odd, right? Who's going to be like, come on, more, right? So that's what's going to happen. You have to pay attention first to betting you in college, but I'm sure it's exponentially helpful when it's one thing to try and predict draft and things like that. But when you actually have these kids on teams, especially I would think in an element like a running back, knowing who you can trust to catch the football. PP, right? We're looking at any elements and any advantages you can get. So being able to catch the football as a third string running back, especially if maybe 1 or 2 guys ahead of you are out tonight, is probably going to be a big difference maker.
Yeah, it is for sure. And there's a couple guys that fit that bill, like Javian Hawkins for Atlanta is somebody I think we should certainly be looking at. But we just had news in the chat that Jamar Jefferson is suited up for this game, which he practiced this week. He did not do individual drills, but I mean, he's a 7th-round rookie. He can't afford to miss this game. So it's not like the regular season where banged up guys will sit. I mean, the stars will, but the guys on the fringes will play through it. So now it kind of makes this backfield a little bit muddled. I would rather play Jamar Jefferson. I think he has a better chance of making the roster, and he's missed some time, so he has to make up for it. Dedrick Mills is not going to make this roster no matter what.
All right, so let's look at that really quick, though, and appreciate Sam Van Dam for the super chat. And yes, we all agree, Matt is GOAT level material here, especially. Look, if this is what we're getting in the preseason, I can't wait until we hit the NFL regular season. But you mentioned Mills, and that's where I'm interested in, because he just went from a guy probably getting 65% of the work tonight to a guy getting what? In your opinion, is like, how much does Mills now drop overall at the running back position because Jefferson's at least active?
I think pretty significant. I mean, you could almost cut his workload in half. And in the projections, Jamar Jefferson is already projected in, so it's not like we have to do much tweaking there. Mills still projects pretty well. I think he's a fine GPP play, especially if Jefferson were to like tweak the ankle or something. I think you primarily see Jefferson run with the twos. So you have Goff maybe out there for a series or two, a quarter max. Mills comes out there, he finishes up whatever's left till half. And then you have Mills probably handling most of the work in the second half, along with, the former defensive player in Abuike. I don't think they really give him much work. But that's where I really see Mills now. Instead of being like a lock, surefire cash option, I think he's just a good tournament play.
All right, we're going to bounce into the wide receiver position, tell you about Prize Picks and a couple of other cool things going on here on the site. William Fields, though, has a super chat for you. And I think this is where we can open up the conversation with the wide receiver position. Zacchaeus there playing much, also a fan of the content. Well, that's credit Matt. He's providing the content. I'm just getting us from 6 to 7. So any thoughts on the question there from William Fields on the super chat?
I don't think Zacchaeus plays a ton tonight. He's pretty secure in his roster spot with Atlanta. So if we look at who is going to make the roster, I think it's Ridley, it's Gage, it's Zacchaeus, and then it's probably Tajay Sharp, Christian Blake, and those guys are the ones that are going to be battling. Like, Zacchaeus has standalone value as a returner. I don't think there's any way he gets beat out to make the roster. So I think he probably plays a quarter max.
Real quick, I saw you on the chat, and I didn't want to overlook anybody. We didn't really talk much about Dallas, especially because we know with Zeke and the situation there. I saw you mention Rico Dowdle on the chat. So let's look at that before we dive deep into the wide receiver position before lock. And again, we have another 25 minutes to do as much as we possibly can throughout this 3-game slate tonight. What do you make of the backfield in Dallas, knowing, of course, with Zeke's situation, even Tony Pollard stepping into more of that one role when Zeke's not there?
I think it's a 5 running back show at the worst case scenario if we see Zeke or Tony Pollard get a series or a couple carries. At best, it's a 3-back show. And there's just other backfields that have 2 guys that are going to see most of the work. Atlanta, Buffalo, now Detroit is mostly like that. In Dallas, you have 3 running backs that are for sure going to carry the ball. Dodal, Jaquan Hardy, and Brendan Knox. People like to point to the box score last week for Dodal, and it was great, but he only played 1 more snap than Jaquan Hardy. So I don't really see that being, like a surefire cash option. I think it's something you can get to, especially with Detroit situation now, Jamar playing. But I think Dodal's a little bit better in GPPs just because there's 3 backs that are for sure going to handle work, not 2 like we see in some other spots. This is an example, I think, where people are getting cute, looking at the Hall of Fame game, talking about Dodal's workload when there are clear spots when we have 2 backs.
Yeah, and I wonder if Hardy has, here's what I'm thinking before I even ask that question. Zeke, Pollard, both of these guys are going to get more of that one first string, 1 series, 1.5 series type look, right? Like Zeke's out there. I can't imagine Pollard is going to be running like a typical second string running back. So does that minimize how long it takes to get to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th stringers, maybe in tournaments and GPP, giving you a little bit more of an edge if you wanted to run Hardy in a couple of lineups?
You're absolutely right. And I mean, let's take this as like a best case scenario that we don't see Zeke or Pollard at all. That's not going to happen. We're going to see Pollard at least for a couple snaps. He played in the Hall of Fame game. So Pollard's going to play a little bit. I don't think it's going to be more than, like 10 plays max, but he's going to play. Zeke, if he plays, he muddles the situation even more. So at a best case scenario, say Pollard's out, you still have 3 backs carrying the ball here. For what you mentioned with Jaquan Hardy, I think he's an excellent GPP play, probably reserved for larger fields, but he did play 1 fewer snap than Dodal.
All right, so let's look at a little bit deeper now into the wide receiver position again as we hit the wideouts, especially as we've already covered wide receivers, now running backs. Any questions that you have, make sure you hit us up. Super chat, not necessary, but definitely a good way to get our attention. Welcome to Ricky Tate, to Team Awesemo as well. And before we even do that, just a quick reminder about Prize Picks, right? Daily prop contest. They just want to help you get everything going, and we're going to do that with a deposit. Where Prize Picks, you don't deal with all the sharks, the optimizers, the big major mass entries. Pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players available, and that's all you need to do. Get on the board correctly, pick a 5-player lineup. You can net up to 10 times your entry fee. Speaking of which, just use our promo code Awesemo, and you'll receive an instant deposit match of up to $100. That's insane right there. You drop 100. Use our promo code Awesemo. We're going to match $100. $200, you can do damage. I don't care where it is. You could do a lot of damage with $200. NFL, yes. And baseball going on, even esports, Prize Picks sponsoring today, and the place that you want to be, especially as you know, it's just easier, streamlined. And that's all we ask is you go and take advantage of our promo code Awesemo. All right, wide receivers. Now, this is crazy because if it's Arizona, Dallas, where there are going to be a bunch of bodies on there, or trying to find the opposite, let's look at where the best value to you, Matt, jumps out at this position, where we can find a wide receiver core that's not as deep, and also try and pinpoint a guy that is going, or at least expected to get playing time, even if it's a result of it being a thin wide receiver core tonight.
One position like this, one team I should say, is Detroit. They have a ton of injuries right now, and you're not going to see Perriman, Cephas, Chad Hansen, Damian Ratley. The starters will play a little bit, so that's probably Tyrell Williams. Amon-Ra St. Brown is expected to play 2 to 3 series, and he's an interesting case because he's a day 3 rookie who's now running with the ones because they're so thin at wide receiver. I think he's a pretty good play in preseason DFS. I'm pretty interested in a guy like Khalif Raymond, who has the questionable tag on DraftKings. Ignore that. He's been practicing all week, and I'm not on Twitter while I'm on the stream right now. So if he's not warming up, please let me know. He's in a lot of my lineups, but
yes,
nothing would suggest to me that he's not going to play because he has been practicing through the latter half of the week. And he's somebody that had been running with the 3s, but because of all these injuries, he's up with the 2s. And there's even some beat reports that he might start tonight. I think that's excellent because even though he's running with potentially the starters tonight, he's battling for a roster spot in the grand scheme of Detroit's wide receiver core. You could see him run with the 1s and the 2s because of that. So I'm really interested in Khalif Raymond. I like Amon-Ra St. Brown just from a talent standpoint, and he should play more than a couple of series.
I want to go back, not to Rondale Moore specifically, but to this crowded, at least on paper, wide receiver core. A lot of guys do have tags next to them. So is there a pivot, even if let's assume that we're not rolling with Moore kind of getting up to where we are with Locke? Is there a pivot on Arizona even that you like, maybe not as much as a healthy Moore, but just somebody you can go to maybe take advantage of a bunch of guys on this wide receiver core dealing with the Q next to their name?
So like a specific player on Arizona you're looking to?
I don't know if it's a Gafford, Ward, somebody on the deep end like that.
Yeah, so let me pull up Arizona right now. Sorry, I had
no. That's you know what, I threw you on the spot there, so that's my fault.
You're all good. I think Gafford's fine. Some of the receivers on the back half of Arizona's roster project pretty well. That's just because we probably don't see a ton of DeAndre Hopkins, AJ Green, Christian Kirk. So like Keyshawn Johnson is a pretty good projection. Gafford does as well. Andre Bocellia, who's a former UDFA from Washington, AJ Richardson, same deal with him coming out of Boise State. Again, Arizona has a lot of bodies, so I think those are GPP plays more than anything, but they'll be on the field a decent amount because we won't see as much Hopkins, Green, and Kirk.
I want to go to Buffalo because Allen not playing, Trubisky we talked about kind of at the jump, playing 1 minute in one series we would anticipate there, so that opens up a couple of other guys. Is there, not expecting Sanders, right? Diggs, even I don't even know what we're going to get from him at all. So is there an other, specifically for GPPs for tournaments, is there a name here that you'd even be interested in stacking with a Buffalo quarterback? Or are you kind of just trying to take advantage of that not as crowded backfield and maybe stay away from the wide receiver position with the Bills?
I probably won't take a quarterback from this team, but their wide receivers, I think, are fine. They project to have 10 tonight, so that's 2 fewer than Dallas and Arizona, which is something we like. So within the Buffalo offense, I don't think Diggs plays. Sanders and Beasley probably don't play much. Same with Gabriel Davis. Those 3 are all locks to make this roster. So then you move to their 5th receiver. Isaiah McKenzie is extremely important on special teams. I honestly think he's probably secure. You have the rest of these players battling for one spot. So Jake Kumerow, he's preseason hero. He's been standing out in camp. I think he's a solid look. Marquez Stevenson also projects really well. He's been a little bit down in camp, but they did draft him on day 3. He's a burner coming out of Houston. The last player I'll mention for Buffalo is Isaiah Hodgins. He was the day 3 pick last year out of Oregon State. He's more of your big-bodied possession receiver. So I think this is kind of just whatever Buffalo wants to keep. They have a lot of different prototypes here. I do think Stevenson, Kumerow, and Hodgins all get a pretty good amount of run tonight.
So now, again, this is on the chat about Calvin Ridley looking out, but also a question about from Andrew Marchenko, Marcus Johnson on the Titans. And that kind of opens up any conversation we can have with the wide receivers on the Titans. Again, Julio, I can't imagine that there's going to be anything really from him, if at all, playing tonight. So starting to look at the Titans, taking into account guys in the top of that depth chart, probably not playing much, if at all.
The Titans are probably my second favorite place to target a receiver outside of Detroit. They also have 9 healthy receivers. Again, like you mentioned, we're not going to see Julio. We're not going to see A.J. Brown. And they also just put Cody Hollister on injured reserve. So even a guy like Josh Reynolds, I think, is pretty secure in that number 3 wide receiver spot. The players they should really evaluate here are going to be Dez Fitzpatrick, who's their rookie, came out of Louisville. They have a second rookie in Ray C. McMath. He's coming out of LSU. He's more of a special teams burner type player. He never had more than 20 catches, I believe, in a single season with LSU. Even this past year with we lost Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, so he should have performed better. And the last guy is Marcus Johnson. He's just kind of a preseason hero right now, been excelling in camp. So because of that, I think he'll be rewarded and be on the field. So if you're trying to mix and match receivers, I would go with the 3 from Tennessee and Dez Fitzpatrick, Marcus Johnson, Ray C. McMath, or go to Detroit and play the 3 receivers we already talked about. Not play all of them, but take a receiver from those trios.
If you had to choose in Slim Brody, now this is a guy who threw out that you needed a raise. So I wanted to at least isolate his question before we got out of here. If you had to choose between Fitzpatrick or McMath, who would you take?
I would take Fitzpatrick.
Okay. I did see a question coming in here. And look, it's early. It's the preseason. So we don't expect nor anticipate you to know everything, strategy, application of strategy in the preseason. That's why we have Matt here for you to answer questions. So there's no question too dumb. Trust me, anything I've asked is proof positive of that. But I did see on the chat here a question just about stacking and how much we should stack. Now, again, we're 45 minutes into the show. We talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but I think it's worthy just to kind of come back to your general strategies, Matt, because that I think helps us understand where you're going specifically, especially if it's avoiding a stack in the preseason as opposed to the regular season.
I'm not avoiding stacks. I'm also not forcing them. So when they happen naturally, I'm fine with it. But I'm just taking the most playing time and whatever that gives me, it gives me. Tonight, 3 games. If you're playing multiple lineups, you'll naturally end up with stacks.
Is there any, okay, I know we still have to bounce around really quick to the tight ends and then look at a couple of best bets and looking at maybe some totals here for these 3 games. But while we're in the wide receiver position, where is a stack or 2 that you have identified that you are going to roster and play tonight in tournaments, maybe even in a cash game?
Yeah, so natural stacks are going to come from Tennessee and Atlanta. Those are where we want the quarterbacks from. So Tennessee, it's pretty easy. You're going to get your natural stacks with a lot of the players we just talked about, actually. So again, the 3 I would look to are Dez Fitzpatrick, Marcus Johnson, Ray C. McMath. I think in some Other situations, you might play like a Cameron Batson for tournaments or something, but I'm probably just sticking with the main three. And for Atlanta, it's a little bit more difficult to talk about because they have more healthy receivers on their roster. They're going to be going out there with 11 tonight. So you're just dealing with a slightly less condensed opportunity share. But like we mentioned, Zacchaeus, Ridley, Gage, they should all be safe. Christian Blake and Tajay Sharp, relatively safe. Frank Darby's a day 3 rookie that they are going to be trying to evaluate. He's coming out of Arizona State. He actually played really well in the shadows of Brandon Ayuk. He caught 31 passes for 616 yards. He got hurt almost instantly at the start of 2020, so we didn't get to see him, but he's a developmental receiver for Atlanta. If you're stacking with Franks or McCarron, he'd be the player I would look at.
So tight end, you mentioned Atlanta as being one of the two, and clearly now with Kyle Pitts, a lot of eyes on him, what he can do in the NFL. I don't even know, is he going to play a series? We would anticipate maybe, right? So if you even get that from him. So let's look at the tight end position first and foremost, trying to identify maybe it's a second stringer that's a veteran that has played first string unit time at another team that is just coming in as a backup that we can identify. Where have you looked at the tight end position and thought, all right, this is the guy that I want to roster the most in tournaments?
There's a couple players I'll mention. One is Sean McKeon, and this is a situation where I think we can take some actionable stats from the preseason. Dallas showed their cards with what they want to do with the backups. We're not expected to see Dalton Schultz. Blake Jarwin is coming off the ACL tear, so he's healthy. He'll probably play a little bit, but don't expect to see Jarwin out there for extended playing time. And then they didn't really have other tight ends running routes last week. Sean McKeon easily led the position with 17 routes and 4 targets. He formerly played tight end at Michigan. His career best was 31 catches there. So I think he's somebody you can look at right away. I'm also interested in Buffalo, where you have a tight end battle kind of raging. Dawson Knox, not what they thought they were getting with him. But behind him, you have Jacob Hollister coming in. He's probably a lock to make the roster. That third tight end, I think, is a battle between Tommy Sweeney and Quentin Morris. I actually have interest in rostering both for tournaments. Tommy Sweeney didn't play last year. He had a heart defect, if I'm not mistaken, but he had 3 straight seasons at Boston College with 345 yards. And then Quentin Morris, he's more of your kind of big slot tight end. He played his college ball at Bowling Green, caught 42 and 55 passes in 2018 and 2019 before COVID-19 shortened his senior season. So those are 2 pure options for receiving players at tight end. One last guy I'll mention is Charlie Tamopeo for Detroit. We're not going to see TJ Hawkinson play a lot. Darren Fells is a vet, and Alize Mack is more of a blocking tight end. He played his college ball at Notre Dame. I think we have Charlie Tompano as an option for just kind of that big slot receiver at the tight end position here as well. He played his college ball at Portland State, where he caught 36 passes for 474 yards. He'll probably get a lot of run in the second half.
Last night, I think, just to put this into context, the Eagles are a good example of this, where you've got young receivers, you've got unknowns at that position, but you've got constants at the tight end. And this is probably an extreme example of it, but you've got 2 constants at the tight end position. Is there an opportunity in the preseason tonight, if you were looking at a stack, to slide somebody in at the tight end position with the quarterback, mainly because you're taking advantage of just reps out here where normally you wouldn't get that in the regular season?
An interesting spot to approach that, I think, is Jared Pinkney for Tennessee. He's one I actually forgot to mention. I should have mentioned him with the previous group. I think he's in a pretty attractive spot because you're probably not going to see Ferkser play a ton. Jeff Swaim is already out. Jared Pinkney is a strong receiving tight end. He just had like the worst combine I've ever seen. He ran like a 4.9 40-yard dash. He played his college ball at Vanderbilt, and in his best season, he caught 50 passes for 774 yards. So he was a great receiving option at tight end. He's just a little bit limited athletically. Against the third stringers, I don't think that matters a ton. And we know Tennessee, they like to run a lot of 12 personnel. They hired an in-house replacement to replace their OC. So I think they will continue to run some 12 personnel, with Pinkney being a good option.
Is there a situation at tight end that you're avoiding? And again, I think sometimes people are building, trying to dive deep into maybe the wideout position, thinking, all right, well, it's a name I know, so let me just roster this guy at the tight end position. But is there an area that, or just a game, maybe even a position here, specifically tight end, a team that you're avoiding that you think maybe could be a trap, or just in general, your gut says stay the hell away?
I think Atlanta is one of these positions at the tight end, particularly. It's because you don't have Hayden Hurst playing. You don't have, I presume we're not going to see Kyle Pitts for a lot of the game either. That leaves 3 tight ends on their roster. Normally that'd be super attractive till you actually look at who the players are. You have Lee Smith. He's a pure blocker. You have Ryan Becker. He's a pure blocker, and he's been written up at a few other sites. Just remember, he had 16 career catches at SMU in 4 years. So I don't know if you want to roster Becker. Maybe if you think he's made strides as a receiver, but I don't think he has. And the last guy on their roster is Parker Hesse. He played defense in college. So, I mean, this kind of makes me think they're going to run the ball a lot in the second half with Hawkins and Caleb Huntley. So I think rather than roster a tight end from Atlanta, maybe you just look to the backs. And they had John Rain as a tight end, and they moved him to fullback. So, I mean, I don't know what they're doing.
I'm curious, just as we look at defenses, again, you've got 6 tonight, so this is not a gigantic slate to bounce around. How do you even approach D in the preseason?
I just look for the big favorites and the teams playing against the worst quarterbacks.
Okay, so who fits the mold of the 6 defenses available tonight? Because we're not talking about ones, we're talking about 2s, mostly 3s, and a lot 4. Who fits the mold tonight as far as, because we don't have gigantic favorites as far as on the board there. Cowboys are 2-point dogs coming into Arizona. Everything else is under 2 points. So how are you looking at anybody that fits that mold as far as your top D or 2 Ds?
I think Atlanta is the best D to target. You don't have Tannehill, so they're going to be facing Logan Woodside. And I mean, neither of the quarterbacks in that room are mobile, so you have the chance for sacks. I think Tennessee, for the same reason, is also a solid defense. I know we're talking about the same game. They're going to be facing off just against Felipe Franks and company. The only difference is Franks is a little bit of mobility, so maybe he can dodge some sacks just by running the ball. So, and Tennessee's also the underdog in that game. So I would favor Atlanta. From there, I think your best defensive options might be a team like Detroit. Again, Josh Allen's not going to play, but I think Trubisky, and you mentioned this at the beginning of the show, having starting experience and mobility just makes Detroit's defense a little bit cut below the ones we talked about. And then with Dallas and Arizona, you have pretty competent play. Maybe you look to Arizona because anytime you can get a defense facing Ben DiNucci, that's worth considering at the very least.
Who's the worst defense? The defense that you refuse to play tonight?
I would not play Dallas. You're facing 2 dual threat quarterbacks. Even Streveler as a backup is going to be a dual threat. You have Murray, who's going to play a series or 2. He's a strong dual threat. And that game has the highest over-under, so we're expecting a lot of points to be scored.
Yeah, and look, I know it's tough to kind of come into it with any type of handicap on the line per se, but this is where I feel like you can truly use DFS analysis, and it's probably just by coincidence that we have the bets and everything at the end, but this is where I truly feel like I can take all of your DFS analysis on 3rd and 4th string quarterbacks in all of these games, all 3 of these games, and have a pretty good idea of where to bet. Like I'm pretty confident that I can take the Cardinals, even if it's laying the 2 points tonight, because of what you said with both the quarterback situation in Dallas and more so just their defense already coming into issues. As far as points are concerned, like I'm inclined, especially from the running standpoint, I'm inclined to go under that 36.5 in that Lions game as well. So my takeaway, and I'll take the hit if both of these fail. Don't worry, Matt. I'm not blaming you preemptively for these bets. But my biggest takeaway from your conversation with us about where to apply DFS strategy would be to take the Cardinals laying the 2 at home and to hammer that under 36.5 for the Bills Lions, and probably not mess around with that Falcons game, at least not until we start to see some stuff happen.
Those are actually my favorite 2 bets too. My favorite one overall is just Arizona laying the 2, because they're going to be facing Gilbert, Cooper Rush, and DiNucci, and they're going to be playing a lot of their starters, at least for a series or 2.
See, I say that everybody accuses me of being biased here in Philadelphia. You know, we start ripping the Vikings, people will start saying the same thing about you as a Packers guy, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Just wait till tomorrow.
There you go. Exactly, man. Do you have any? I know we're going to do the strategy show tomorrow and we're going to get you again live before lock. Is there any advice, just kind of big picture advice that you can give some people on the way out, especially as it's new for a lot of people, right? As far as playing DFS preseason football, maybe just a warning or a little piece of advice on the way out, even if it's for tonight or just overall for the weekend.
Yeah, I think you're trying to find these playing time situations. And if you're short on time, I mean, I just sit in my apartment all day doing this. I mean, it's my job. But if you don't have the time, try to use the tools we have at Awesemo. We have depth charts up there. We have the written breakdown to try to give you some context to them, and then these shows. So I would just say try to use the resources that are available to you. Go on Twitter before the game kicks off. And I honestly appreciate all you guys in chat telling me that Jamar Jefferson is playing so I could get Dedrick Mills out of my cash lineup. Thank you. So use Twitter as well.
How much? And I think, look, depending on where you are, you're privy to it way more in Milwaukee because you're covering a team. You've got colleagues covering a team. Same thing with me here in Philadelphia. So I could tell you all about Kenneth Gainwell and where he is in the game plan because I'm seeing it every day. But how much are you relying in the preseason on beat reporters that are covering teams to kind of have an idea, not just depth chart, Matt, but also application of the depth chart in practice?
That's really hard. So you're going to have, they're basically untrained eyes. We're talking about reporters that, they're paid to report the news and then they start giving their own context on how they think a player is doing. I think a great example of this was Dwayne Haskins, and he played amazing last night. But in that first preseason game, he did not. And the week prior, you had beat reporters raving about how great Dwayne Haskins looked. And I mean, I'm not at practice. Maybe he did look great and just performed poorly in the game. But I think you need to take all that with a grain of salt. The best stuff you can get from beat reporters are any sort of charting, like so-and-so played so many snaps with the first team. That gives you kind of a window into exactly what the coaches want to do rather than a talent evaluation. I don't really care what they think about talent.
I did see this, that you got a TV. Was there a situation last year where you didn't have a TV?
Yeah, I did. I did not have a TV, but got one.
Wait a second. I know we're out of here in 55 seconds. So I don't know if there's going to be anything life-changing as far as you can give out now that we haven't covered in 59 minutes. Was it like you didn't have a TV, but you were getting everything off your computer and you're just a modern individual? Or was it like you were stuck in some one-room box with no electricity for a year?
Oh, no, I still live there. And that is what my apartment is like, for sure. Like right now, I'm not going to give you guys the tour, but the TV is not up. I have to alternate between using the microwave and using the TV because I don't have enough space.
We need video of that, Matt. What are you talking about? Can't somebody film you doing that?
When we have a little more time, I will give you guys the grand tour.
Fair enough. Thank you to Matt. Thanks, Matt, out there as well. And the easiest way to do that, on top of giving him praise, as you all have on the chat, is make sure you smash that like button. Thanks to Jordan for doing more than just producing the show. My goodness, moderating that chat. I don't know what the hell happened over there, but Jordan's on top of that. Awesome stuff, Matt. This was a blast. You and I are going to be back tomorrow afternoon for the strategy show leading up to another lock and another slate. So appreciate you, brother.
I appreciate you too. Thank you. It was the first time we got to hang out. I had a blast.
Me too. Thanks to everybody out there. Enjoy it and have a great night.